One second, gentlemen. So just going to make sure that from my side here, everything is in place, which it should be. And after that, we'll make a start. I know we already had a great conversation with the student, but I'm just going to go and ask for reintroduction. So I'm just going to ask you to reintroduce yourself. Yeah. And I think we can make a start. So what we're doing here, it's our, let's say, post-webinar conversation. So talking about data center in Africa, so how can we expand it, but keep it sustainable as well, reliable, powered by clean energy. So we touched on many points in the conversation earlier, and I'd just like to carry a little bit more with you, gentlemen. So if that's okay, but because some people might actually join the conversation just right now, so what I like is just to go around again and ask you to reintroduce yourself. So start by you, maybe John this time, and then Tyler, and then Moses.
Sure. Thank you. Again, my name is John Jordan. I'm the co-founder and managing partner for Fight for Light. And I'm a Morehouse graduate, and right now we're working on a virtual power plant both in the US, stateside, based in Metro Atlanta, all the way throughout the Deep South. We look at EPA Region 4, which includes the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and also Florida. And we're also extending that virtual power plant into South Africa, starting in Midrand, right outside of Joburg.
Excellent. Tyler?
Yeah, my name is Tyler Hurlbert. I'm the Director of Investor Relations at Energia. Energia is a online investment platform that connects retail investors with renewable energy projects around the globe. Right now, we currently have 3 open investment offerings. We have a portfolio of projects in the US, one in Brazil, and one in Africa. Primarily right now, South Africa, Botswana, that kind of region of the continent, but certainly open to expanding into other areas throughout Africa, and really just kind of trying to democratize the renewable energy investment space and allowing retail investors with as little as $100 minimum investment to invest in solar and the long-term steady dividends that they provide, and also provide it in an impactful and clean way to the environment and all stakeholders.
Excellent. Last but not the least, Moses.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My name is Moses Kamibaro. My day job is that I'm the founder and CEO of .Savvy. It's a digital transformation agency that's been around for about 23 years. The hat I'm wearing that brings me here is that of a blogger, podcaster, and technology analyst, where basically I write about and share content around all things digital in Africa, and especially around the Kenyan market. And particularly, I think in the last couple of years, we've seen this incredible level of growth and uptake and activity around the area of data centers within this particular region of Africa. Kenya currently has about 18 data centers that are operational, with more coming online soon. So for me, this is a interesting topic area, especially because it converges a lot with my interest around areas like AI and, broadly speaking, digital transformation across the African continent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'd like to kick off with you, Moses, because I know we're hearing a lot about data center in Africa, and the potential definitely is there. We talked about that before. And now I think there's also the willingness, from some stakeholders. But in terms of the capacity, can you talk to us a little bit about what exists or doesn't exist at the moment on the ground, and what's been done to sort of keep up with the technology that is advancing from data center point of view?
Yeah, I think maybe I can best do this by quickly presenting something. And when you look at the growth opportunities and challenges, I think number one is digital transformation, especially that was accelerated due to the pandemic. I've been working from home now for practically 5 years. We see this, transition that happened due to the pandemic, and organizations, individuals really have changed their behavior and how they operate at scale. Number two, data centers are really playing a crucial role in the economy, in the continent's economies, because again, they provide us this sort of foundation upon which we can build digital ecosystems and sort of digital ways of working. And then the industry, of course, still faces challenges around infrastructure, energy and such things. When you look at the landscape right now, currently, I believe South Africa has the largest uptake or centers in terms of data centers. As a continent, we have about 176 operational ones. Kenya currently, I believe, has about 18, and then I think Nigeria has slightly less. But we're seeing a scenario where, if you look across the African continent, there's this incredible and rapid uptake, and data centers are expected to supply, increase by about 300% in the coming years. So a lot of investment going into this space. Capacity is going to rise to about 250 megawatts. And you just see this sort of potential here that's just enormous. But of course, that comes with its own unique challenges that we see. But what are the key drivers that are sort of making this all happen? I think number one, surging internet penetration, right? You see the investments going into connectivity, undersea cables, terrestrial fiber. We just see this massive penetration where more and more of the people who are not digitally included are getting connected for the very first time. Cloud computing and digital services, again, governments, financial institutions, businesses are driving the need for local data storage and processing, where again we have easy access and fast access to resources. Data sovereignty laws, where governments are now insisting that a lot of the data is kept in market, in country, to serve the different stakeholders. And of course, we're seeing investment from global players, people like Africa Data Centers, Raxio Group, people like Spakes, who are operating in Kenya and Ghana, expanding significantly across the continent. When we look again into some of the key considerations, some of the key challenges are very obvious. Just as I mentioned earlier, I'm actually sitting in the dark right now. We don't have electricity, so this is really a common problem across Africa. In some markets, it's even worse than others. High operating costs, deploying and managing data centers is generally significantly more expensive to do so here. Limited fiber connectivity. These are still very much the early days of this. And then financing and investment barriers that sort of keep many people away from coming to markets like ours. So that's kind of like sort of the complexion or the situation that we see from an African perspective at this point in time.
Well, that was actually, I must admit, I wasn't expecting such a beautiful presentation. That's great. So that gives us a very much great overview of what's happening. So thank you very much. So what would you say then? It's I would say the picture in the next 5 to 10 years. What kind of demand do you foresee pretty much? Because it's hard to find data about Africa, right? Among pretty much about everything. But it looks like you get a set of data already there inside. So
I had to source
carry on.
a lot of reports. I had to collate a lot of information, and that sort of gave us a picture. But basically, the next 2 to 5 years, I think, are going to be incredibly interesting. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of these data centers coming on stream. The challenges are known. So already from the get-go, we see situations where investors and those who are building the operators are looking at creating more energy efficient data centers. They're looking at using the latest technology. They're starting to host the hyperscalers, so people like Amazon and Microsoft and the likes. And increasingly, we're just seeing a lot of money going into this space, even within the African continent. And even just 2 weeks ago, I was in Mombasa, which is the coastal city in Kenya. And, there's a brand new data center there under the iColo, which is one of the data center operators. They've got two in Mombasa now, one in Nairobi, a fourth one about to come on stream in Kenya as well. And they literally have filled capacity. Africa Data Centers, I was there, I think, about 4 months ago. I did a data center tour. They are now in the process of building an extension to their facility because they've actually filled up capacity. And if you told many people 5, 10 years ago that these data centers would be proliferating the African continent, but also hitting maximum utilization so quickly, they'll tell you it's a big surprise. So if you ask me the next 2 to 5 years, that is like, we saw the megawatt uptake and so forth, it's going to be massive on a Pan-African basis. We literally need those data centers to operate.
Yeah. And as we talked about that, so you say it's going to be massive. That means we need lots and lots of power to power those data centers. And so as power also for the rest of the economy. And when you talk about power, for me, there's usually two types, right? So either you go the traditional way, which is obviously the fossil fuel or the dirty fuel, some would say, or you go the renewable way, right? Okay, we like to move more towards the renewable way. That's why I want to turn towards you, Tyler. So, because obviously you're doing project across the globe, especially in some emerging markets, including Africa. what do you see as the key barrier to integrate more renewable energy in actually the ecosystem, the power ecosystem in those places?
Yeah, I think Moses touched on it, which is kind of the financing challenges sometimes that come with not just Africa, the continent of Africa, but developing markets, more emerging market economies, which is this subject of bankability, which is just kind of can an investor, a reasonable retail investor here in the States, comfortably invest in a company or infrastructure projects in a particular area of the world and have a pretty good idea that they're gonna make a return on their investment and that their investment's going to be safe, right? So I think that's part of we talked about in the class presentation there, that Energia just recently participated in this signing of the Abidjan Accord a few months ago down in Cote d'Ivoire, and it's really things like that that will, I think, really play a huge role in moving Africa and other developing areas of the world forward, in that you get together, a group like Africa 50 working alongside the World Bank, working alongside Bridgewater, one of the largest hedge funds, in the world, Global Citizen, one of the largest voices to magnify that, through a megaphone. And you get those people together in a room and start to kind of come up with some parameters around how can we make these investments more, realistic throughout the continent of Africa, and again, more bankable and more, from a risk standpoint, acceptable to the average everyday investor. And then that's when you start to see capital flow into an area and real progress and change start to happen.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So a lot of it's underpinned by the fact that we need change to happen, right? And John, when I come to you, I think you are, I can say, an international investor, right? So we're doing a project in South Africa and that data center, and you certainly have an opinion, right? So if I ask you the questions, how can, let's say, African government or officials, or whoever they are at national, local level, can actually collaborate with an international investor like you to really drive this change? What would you say? What's your opinion there? So what should they do?
So I think our focus is really in understanding and this is, I've heard it spoken about in different languages or, different terminologies, whether it's bottom of the pyramid we like to use the idea of kind of shared value framework. And we do focus on community innovation. So understanding that those breakthrough in technologies, the breakthrough in the platforms, and really making these larger conversations work for the masses, the mass market, or even just they start with a focus on kind of a key niche. And so our strategy is to really focus on those who have been disconnected or left behind by the innovation and information age economies, the industrial and information age economies, to really drive this new emerging innovation economy and the next generation of what's going to be developed because of this AI technology. There's a deep astuteness in terms of creative ways of using this that kind of emerged out of their necessity. And then also understanding that there's infrastructure needed, both from an investor standpoint of how do you actually finance these markets that don't have traditional investment profiles. And that's where, as Tyler kind of pulled out, where government partners or even large institutional partners can actually set up capital funds to actually explore things like that can lead to instruments that I think impact investment tools that can connect to these larger movements of like the Global Impact Investors Network, and actually create funds or instruments that can actually backstop the risk. In certain ways, we saw Goldman Sachs do these types of deals with philanthropic capital in partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies to unlock a financial instrument like the Social Impact Bond, to be able to move private capital to support government needs. We can do the same thing for community innovation and community opportunity. And so, I think things like Grameen Bank have shown that if you invest in the community in an innovative way that's really understanding and true to the community dynamics, that you can unlock large potential growth. But the opportunity is both that the communities who that represent that growth opportunity should have shared ownership in those models once they do get figured out, and really provide an opportunity for leapfrog of where things are, and that there has to be an openness to understand that bankability in those environments is going to look completely different than the traditional modes of investing or even traditional tools that we're used to. And so how do we collectively build those? I think there has to be spaces, and that's really what our work represents in the community innovation labs that we set up abroad and even in the US, is about bringing in spaces where the capital providers can bring in and say, hey, here's the financial tools that we have and the limits we have. And then saying, how do we creatively make that financing work? And then also, like I said, the demand for solar is there. We actually have groups, in our deal, we had to put together a pipeline that went beyond just rooftop solar because it wasn't able to get to the scale for, where buying power like Microsoft could backstop that risk for investors. So we had to bring in Black farmers. And there was one of the things we found is that especially residents in Atlanta, a lot of cities actually have people who move from rural spaces, but their family still is in direct connection to that land. There was an interest to be able to use and set up solar farms in those areas. They saw large utility scale solar getting involved, but there wasn't the trust built to actually go through the people who are knocking on their doors and didn't look like them coming from their communities. So how do we do this in a way that can broker that trust, bring those projects online, but also make sure that it can the capital can be spread to those people who are no longer in those communities, but also doing so in the urban environments with projects like Tyler said, their focus is smaller than 1 megawatt and being able to bring like rooftop solar on. So I think that, one of the things that Moses has spoke about is this digital transformation. We also have to understand that the mentality that powered a lot of this growth also creates a lot of these issues. So we're going to have to look at these solutions through a different lens of possibility and openness to say that, hey, these models have to be created, they must be created, but they may not look the same. In that adjustment or even the translation or the co-creation, we have to have spaces where we do that hard work of figuring that out, and that those platforms are really built to standardize that. And that's what I think is exciting about right now, is that platform economics is unlocking that value, is creating ways of standardizing it, and also creating custom solutions to things on the ground. So that's what's happening right now. That's really exciting and can change drastically the next 10, 20 years for the continent and also in America. Okay.
So what role do you think innovative technology play in all of this? So certainly in terms of energy efficiency for data center, but also all kind of infrastructure. Can you mention maybe a couple of technologies you believe are actually changing the picture? So I'm not talking about you having a deeper technical understanding, but also even from a business perspective, financial perspective, or even policy perspective, what kind of emerging technology you see are obviously changing the picture here? Any of you, actually. It could be you.
Yeah, I'll go really quickly because I think I'll just speak to 3 things that actually were shared as a part of Africa Awareness Week and some of the previous panels. I really am excited about kind of the next generation battery research that's taking place in the solid state batteries, specifically in regards to like hemp. Hemp is providing an opportunity for carbon capture and carbon sinks. But it's also a very high value, like the value chain of goods that can come from the hemp product. I'm really excited about, and then it also gives farmers who are already used to kind of farming existing things a new mode of income. And so I just think there's a lot of products that can actually come for that, and specifically to reduce the use of lithium and coltan on batteries is going to be very key. For really humanizing the growth of the renewable energy space over the next 10, 20 years. I'm really excited about the idea of atmospheric water generators. So even in environments like Liberia or things that are on the equator that are very humid, being able to actually get clean, drinkable water out of that. And also data centers are huge uses of water as well. So being able to say, how do we have sustainable systems of water that are going to be produced from this are really exciting. And then offshore energy productions, those systems I think that are actually happening are really exciting, including like, you know, some people are doing materials things around the waste material that's coming out off of the shores as the temperatures are heating up. So the innovation landscape is very robust. I do see a lot of opportunity to create leapfrog innovation and also equalizing innovation in those kind of areas of technology emerging.
Okay, that's great. So any take on from you, Moses or Tyler?
Yeah, I can hop in here real quick and then turn it over to Moses. I don't have a ton. I think John did a good job of touching on, you know, certainly batteries throughout Africa and you know, places that deal with load shedding and the, you know, grid instability. You know, batteries are invaluable there, and we've used batteries on a couple of our projects throughout Africa, throughout our Solarize Africa portfolio. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you know, happening on the ground in these areas, and you know, I think for us one of the things is monitoring. There's a lot of, so we don't necessarily build these solar projects. We just connect investors with, you know, generally, you know, ready to build or operational assets. But we do monitor them on an ongoing basis. And, you know, through things like, you know, Starlink and, you know, internet becoming more available and just different technologies around and companies, quite frankly, that are working with solar monitoring, it allows us to operate these portfolios much more efficiently. I mean, we can see a project in, you know, Botswana or in South Africa if a string of, you know, an inverter is down and a string of modules is out, or specifically kind of what's happening on the ground with a project without having necessarily a company or you know, an O&M or an operations and maintenance company there. So I think from a monitoring standpoint, you know, the better we can monitor these projects, the more efficiently we can run them, which then returns, you know, higher investment yields to our investors.
Thanks for that. Do you have anything to add to that, Moses?
Not really much to add, but I think for me, being on the ground and seeing, you know, just if we just look at Kenya as one of the epicenters of where we're seeing data centers come on stream, we're seeing additional technology infrastructure come into play, more fiber, more cables are landing, you know, to Africa and a few others as well. I think it's very exciting times. You know, the big question, of course, is the energy piece. We have a lot of solar capability here. Kenya, I think, is like 95% green energy. You know, we do geothermal, we do solar, we do wind and other things. And I think it's almost like a marriage made in heaven. If Kenya in particular and others across the African continent can sort of build their data centers on some of the advantages or the benefits of the inherent environment that we have, then I think, you know, we have the potential and the opportunity that these data centers will serve not just the continent, but potentially in the future could serve the rest of the world as well. So I'm incredibly optimistic, you know, especially when we see the current trajectory and what it means or it portends for the future.
Excellent. So I'm just going to talk about one last question, which will be the final word. I think I want to leave some clear call to action to some key stakeholders. I want to talk to businesses, policymakers, but also energy developers. So I'm going to ask each of you, just pick one of them, right? Either the business, the policymaker, or the energy developer. If you had two key action you would recommend them to do to ensure that we have a sustainable and resilient digital infrastructure in Africa, what would it be? So let's start with you, for example, John. So who do you want to talk to, the business, the policymaker, or energy developer?
I'm going to talk with the businesses and the government in this instance, which is the utility companies in a lot of these places. For me, I think the share value models of the power purchase agreements are really unlocking a lot of possibilities. And then it also allows for a little bit of flexibility. So the Microsoft was one of the companies that really was creative in developing an environmental justice power purchase agreement model. They piloted it really early on with a group called Soul Systems, and then they did one using a minority developer and really through a supplier diversity lens with Volt Energy, and that instantly created one of the largest utility scale providers of color in the country. And so our version of kind of a community owned power purchase agreement, environmental justice power purchase agreement, is a new model that really makes sure that we can build on those as precedents and those successes, but make sure that we can get their commitment and financial commitment to a broader audience of those that are really on the front lines of environmental injustice and the need for environmental equity work, but also doing so in a way that is shared value and focused on their bottom line. So we've seen in the Deep South, Meta has done this with their data centers. Amazon, as they're bringing on these data centers and just these decentralized models that allow their buying power as corporations to both be matched with their sustainability goals, but also understanding that the data center infrastructure is critical to their bottom line. They can be more intentional of how they're directing those dollars in a way that can backstop and unlock solar in places that need it. And that we can measure those things that also then are run off of their digital infrastructure. So it really kind of creates a positive feedback loop that also can unlock value in unique places. And then for governments, being able to design a policy landscape that can actually support these type of things, understanding that these innovations haven't been created. And instead of really regulating for when things go wrong, is really set a policy environment that is conducive to testing these things out and growing and learning and working with experts in the field to design those policy spaces that understand the financing mechanisms needed, the financial incentives for corporations to unlock entrepreneurship and innovation in those spaces. So, and being able to, replicate when a model works rapidly using government dollars and buying power to scale it. These on the ground models are really impressive and are creating things that governments can scale really easily. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, excellent. So what about you, Tyler? Who do you want to talk to? The business, the policymaker, or energy developer?
And I would have to cop out here and say all three. I think when all of those three folks are working or kind of stakeholders are working in concert, really, really impactful things can happen. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go with policymakers, just because, again, for us, going back to that whole idea that, again, I'll mention, we're in the development phase right now of a fourth portfolio at Energia that hopefully sometime this summer we'll launch, and it's going to be a Latin America portfolio. So we'll still be able to invest in Brazil and some other countries, Panama potentially, but we're really looking strongly at Colombia. And we're able to, consider this portfolio of projects because of a really nice relationship or kind of guarantee that the Colombian government has kind of set out to, they have a mission to provide electricity to every citizen in the country. And it's one of their mandates, it's a policy, and it's really impactful in that, we're trying to work with a company out there on the ground called Helios to build these tiny little, solar arrays that can be put in a very remote location in villages to bring power to people that have never had power before. This is obviously something that we could not invest in as a retail investment platform, with our investors. It wouldn't be a profitable investment. It would be something we might consider doing just from a pure philanthropic standpoint to bring power to the world. And that's something that we do on an annual basis. We support various nonprofits and things like that. But yeah, so the fact that the Colombian government has put this policy and this mandate in place to bring power to all its citizens, they're guaranteeing payments, the payments for that electricity, the payments for those systems to develop it. They're putting a lot at stake and on the line to do that. And it allows Energia now to basically invest in sovereign Colombian debt, which is pretty risk-free, or not risk-free, but pretty an advantageous investment from a risk standpoint. So, things like that from a policy standpoint really go a long way with us. Maybe as a secondary note, I'd say certainly the development companies and the businesses on the ground in these areas, you got to have good relationships with those companies to make sure that projects are being built on schedule, on budget, and on time. That's always something that we're looking at, finding new partners in different areas of the world to help us kind of move our mission forward of building and deploying these solar assets in developing countries.
Excellent. Last but not the least, we're coming to you, Moses, because obviously you are on the ground in Kenya. So what key action do you think business policymaker or energy developer, just pick one or all three, in order to ensure that we have sustainable but resilient as well digital infrastructure in the continent?
I think for me, I'd have to speak to the policymakers. So think about government, the lawmakers, and think about how do we create the right incentives and the right initiatives that actually allow Africa to not get left behind in this new AI era. Because even as we start building our data centers and we start building our digital infrastructure, as more value is migrating to digital ecosystems, unfortunately, this is one of those key moments where we're shifting from industrial revolution, we're going very digital now. We have the opportunity to either be a significant participant in this new era, or potentially we're going to lose so many opportunities. And already one of the areas that I'm particularly worried about is that with the advent of AI, there are jobs that we had seen that Africa would pick up, sort of low cost labor, doing things like data entry and so forth. And these are the tasks that we see that AI potentially is going to take over very soon and very quickly. It's already happening. So I think we need to sort of quickly pivot and realize that, the target we're aiming for maybe 5 years ago is no longer relevant. And we need to be thinking 10 to 15 years down the road, what does the world look like? What does even our education curricula look like for our youth? And how do we start aligning ourselves to this new reality? And that means we need to sort of be not so much consumers of innovation, but we need to become engines of innovation ourselves across the African continent. The only way that happens is we need the mandate and we need the supporting regulations and the various initiatives that incentivize, through government and policymakers to actually make that a reality. And I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think our leadership have quite understood the magnitude of transition that's needed to do so. And that's what my call to action would be, that we need to take pause. We need to take stock of where we are, where things are shifting, because the goalposts have shifted, and more importantly, what we need to do to sort of not fall behind and make sure that we're globally competitive from that perspective.
Thank you very much for that, Moses. So, gentlemen, it was a beautiful conversation that we had. So, talking about the renewable energy solution for the expansion of data center in Africa. So, as you could see, there is a lot happening on the ground, obviously in the framework of all the change that we see around the world. But we also need to make sure that when it does happen, this change on the continent, so somehow it's sustainable, it's also reliable, and we can definitely power Africa forward with that. So, thank you very much for the time. So, thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Moses, thank you, John, and I'm sure we're going to have multiple chances as well to continue the conversation. So enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Tony, while I still have you here, will it be possible to get the recording of this second session so I can post this on my podcast?
Yes, I'll be doing that without a problem.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend and have a great evening.
Bye-bye.